Now, if you had met Edwin back then, you might have thought he had a fine life ahead of him. Folks said he was a talented young man, had a knack for the violin, played just about as well as any respectable person could hope to, wore nice clothes, stood up straight, never talked back to his elders. He could hold a bow with the kind of precision that made grown men sigh and say, "Now there's a lad with promise." And Edwin believed them. He had been raised on music the way some boys are raised on fishing or football, taught that it was the highest art, the greatest pursuit, the one thing worth dedicating his life to. His instructor, Mr. Ashcombe, was a man of discipline. If you imagined a man who had once smiled but had since thought better of it, you'd get a fair picture. He ran his classroom the way a general runs a battlefield, every note placed with precision, every bow stroke measured to exacting perfection. Music, Mr. Ashcombe would say, is order. It is discipline. A single wrong note, Edwin, and you may as well be sawing wood. So Edwin learned to play without a single mistake. His fingers were quick, his bowing exact. He performed concertos by Paganini, Heifetz, Perlman, and of course Mr. Ashcombe's personal favorite, Vivaldi. People clapped. They always clapped. Yet, when the performances ended and the hall emptied, Edwin would sit alone with his violin, feeling as though he had played nothing at all. And the worst part? He had never dared to admit it. Edwin belonged to an elite circle of musicians, trained under Mr. Ashcombe's watchful eye. Only the best were allowed in. They trained, they performed, they competed. And though they were friends, they were also rivals, constantly measured against one another. One evening during rehearsal, one of them fell behind. His name was Elias. He had been struggling for weeks. Edwin had noticed the way Elias flexed his fingers between songs, the way he winced when playing long passages. But no one else had said anything, until the night before a major concert. They were in rehearsal when Elias hit a wrong note. Just one. But one was enough. Mr. Ashcombe stopped the orchestra. The whole room went dead quiet. Elias shifted uncomfortably. "Sorry, if you cannot play correctly, then you will not play at all," Mr. Ashcombe said as if he were commenting on the weather. A stunned silence followed. Edwin glanced at Elias, expecting him to protest, to explain, to remind Mr. Ashcombe that he had been one of his best students for years. But Elias didn't. Instead, he bowed his head, packed up his violin, and walked out. No one stopped him. No one even whispered. And Edwin realized, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, that Elias would not be coming back. He told himself, "That won't happen to me. I've done everything right. I belong here." Then the next night, during the final rehearsal, he made a mistake. Just one. A misplaced note, so small you'd need a magnifying glass to see it. Mr. Ashcombe stopped, looked at him with that same flat expression. "I expected better from you, Edwin," he said. "Perhaps you are not as serious about music as I thought." Now, if you've never felt your stomach drop right out of your body, I can tell you, it's not a pleasant experience. Edwin opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Mr. Ashcombe had already moved on. And just like that, Edwin saw it, clear as daylight. For years, he had believed he was valued for his passion, for his talent, for his love of music. But now, he understood. He was only valued for what he could contribute. And suddenly, music itself felt empty. That night, he played at the concert. He played flawlessly, and he felt nothing. So, after the applause faded and the audience left, he packed up his violin, walked out into the night, and never played again. For years, he told himself he didn't miss it. He convinced himself that music had never been anything special, that it was just sound, just noise, just an arrangement of notes that people pretended meant something. And for the most part, he believed it, until one evening. It was a cold night in the city, the kind that made street lamps flicker and windows fog with warmth. Edwin was walking home when he heard something unexpected. A violin. He had spent years avoiding music, so he tried to keep walking. But something in the way the notes moved, the way they shivered, then soared, then softened like a whisper, made him stop. It was coming from a street corner. There, sitting on a battered wooden stool beneath a flickering street lamp, was an old man. His violin was scratched, his bowstring worn thin. A hat sat on the ground in front of him, half full of coins. But the way he played, it wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Edwin, though he no longer thought of himself as a musician, stood there, listening. And for the first time in years, he felt something. A lump formed in his throat. Before he could stop himself, a single tear slid down his cheek. The old man saw. He stopped playing, tilted his head slightly. "You all right, son?" Edwin swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I've never heard music like that before." The old man gave a slow nod. "Or maybe," he said, "you've just never felt it before?" Edwin hesitated. The old man shifted on his stool. "Did you play?" I used to." The old man nodded again. "And did you love it?" Edwin looked down at his hands that had played for years, but never truly felt music. "I don't know," he admitted. The old man's voice was quiet but steady. "Let me play you something." And he did. And this time, Edwin didn't just listen. He felt it. When the music stopped, the old man rested his bow on his knee. "So tell me," he said gently, "is music just noise? Or have you simply never known its beauty?" Edwin said nothing. Did music lose its power? Or did you spend your life playing a hollow tune? The old man let the question settle, then asked, "And if the true song has been waiting for you all along, what then?" Edwin's throat was tight. His hands trembled, and for the first time in years, he wished he had his violin.